Now, WWE just started another season of its biography series and its Rivals series on A&E. And I don't know that I'm going to be watching it every week. I think tonight it's Jake Roberts' The Biography, and I think they're doing Undertaker and Mankind on Rivals. But I did watch the first episodes of each, and the biography one was on the nWo. And you can imagine it was a lot of the same stuff you've heard 1,000 times about how the nWo came to be. If you already know the story, you're not going to learn much in the way of new stuff. There are a couple of things at the end. You've got Kevin Nash reacting to Scott Hall's passing. Eric Bischoff shares a nice story about a fan of his. But other than that, it's exactly what you would expect it to be. The thing that irritated me, and the reason I wanted to talk about this, was the portion that covered the Hogan-Sting match at Starrcade 1997. A match that they had been building to for close to 18 months. And on the back of that match, Starrcade did 700,000 pay-per-view buys that year. It's the most financially successful pay-per-view that the company ever did. And it was all building to Sting finally taking down Hollywood Hogan and taking the title back for WCW. This was going to be the big payoff. It should have been the greatest night in WCW history. It ended up as one of their most embarrassing. It ended up as being one of their greatest disgraces. It was not a case where they changed the outcome. The outcome was going to originally be Sting winning the title. And in the end, Sting did end up winning the title. But they changed the finish to where they did the title change in the weakest, most counterproductive, damaging way possible. Like if you tried to think of a way, okay, we're going to do this title change, but how can we fuck this up so royally? Like, how can we screw it up in the biggest possible way? That's the finish they went with. Eric Bischoff has told the story before, and he did not on this episode, but on his podcast and in other interviews over the years, he has told the story that when Sting showed up to the building that night, he was not in the physical shape that he needed to be in. So it wasn't that he wasn't in any condition to perform because he was fucked up on pills or booze or anything like that. Just physically, he looked like he had not been working out in the gym, and he had no tan. He had not been tanning himself. And this was a sign of a man apparently who looked like he just didn't care. He claims Sting was going through some personal issues in his life at the time. He kind of alludes maybe there were marital issues, but I don't think he's ever actually said. But he claims that, Steve was going through some personal things in his life, and that may have played a role in his appearance and his overall demeanor. And so that was the reason why they felt they had to make a change. Now, I said they. It wasn't just Eric Bischoff, it was Hulk Hogan as well. Because as he tells the story, they were in the room, Sting comes in, they both look at Sting, and then they both have the same exact idea, and they both looked at each other, as if to say, like, what the fuck? Right? So that's the story that he has told in the past. Not in this episode, though, he didn't. That cockamamie story was never even mentioned here. I have watched this match back many times over the years. This may not have been peak Sting cosmetically with like muscles bulging, but he looked perfectly fine to me. Was he physically smaller than Hogan that night? Yes, he was. But he looked perfectly fine to me. And he was wearing, by the way, that night, a full bodysuit. It wasn't like he was wrestling without a shirt on. He had new gear made. This was his first match in over a year, at least on television. So I thought he looked fine. There was not a single person in the crowd that night looking at Sting when he came out going, oh my God, what happened to the amazing shrinking Sting? Or I can't cheer for this guy because he doesn't have a fucking tan. Again, none of this is even mentioned in this episode. The day of the show, backstage, Bischoff says that Hulk looked at me and said, not today. Not today, brother. Okay, so now we're talking about what Bischoff does say in the special. Hulk looked at him and said, not today. Sting is interviewed. He says, let's just stick to the plan and deliver what we said we were going to, not this last minute stuff. Hogan is interviewed in his John 3:16 shirt, lying through his teeth, admitting that he had a problem with it because if you're going to beat somebody, you need to leave them better off after they're beaten than they were before. I guess Hulk was worried by losing to Sting, he would be relegated to wrestling the Universal Studios tapings for Worldwide. And he said, Eric really wasn't sure where we were going with this thing. So Hogan assigns blame for this to his friend Eric. Kevin Nash is interviewed, and he flat out says, you can't give a wrestler creative control. You just can't do it. Bischoff claims Hogan never outright used his creative control clause or threatened to use it, but that night Hulk wasn't feeling it. And it was a mad scramble. So he puts the blame on Hogan. Or was it Sting? I'm not sure. Was it Sting, whose muscles I thought were wasting away under his pale flesh? Hogan finally says, okay, brother, I'll put him over. Right? This is him talking in the special. Okay, brother, I'll put him over. Sting said that right up until the moment he came through the curtain that night, he didn't know what they were going to do. It was so chaotic during the day and changes were being talked about and changes were being made, he didn't know what was going to happen. Bischoff said they came to an agreement that the best way to go was a controversial finish to the match, and that the goal was to give Hogan the fast count, to give Sting the justification to then demand a rematch on the spot. The only problem is, that fast count wasn't a fast count at all. Nick Patrick counted at his normal pace. And they showed footage of the 3 count. This was like the fucking Zapruder footage from the JFK assassination. They must have showed this 6 or 7 times. They showed the footage of the 3 count as Hogan is narrating over it, and he says, the referee, brother, counts 1, 2, 3, and Sting didn't kick out. And they cut back to Hogan at the table. He's being interviewed. He acts all shocked. He says the plan was for Sting to kick out, and he did not kick out. Bischoff says the fast count was the last-minute fix. He called it the Band-Aid on the original plan. Wait a minute. Let me ask what I think is a perfectly logical question to an illogical situation. Why would Hogan think Sting was supposed to kick out if the plan was for a fast count? This man lies so much he can't keep all the lies straight. It makes no sense. If he believed the plan was for a fast count, Sting would not have kicked out. Yet he acts all stunned when Sting didn't kick out, and he blames Sting for screwing up the finish of the match. So to recap, you have Eric Bischoff blaming Hulk Hogan blaming Eric Bischoff for not knowing what he wants to do, and blaming Sting for not kicking out, and you have Sting blaming everyone and asking, what the hell are we doing here? And it made Bret Hart look like a fool for beating up the referee after the match and claiming a fast count when you could clearly see there was no fast count. It looked like Bret was having war flashbacks to Montreal and beating up Nick Patrick thinking he was Earl Hebner. So they restart the match anyway. Sting goes on to win the title in what should have been the easiest match that Eric Bischoff has ever booked in his entire life. And it ends up being as complicated and as stressful as possible, and they ruined it. And I'm sure when they came to the building, that was Bischoff's plan. But then Hogan happened. And by the way, it wasn't just the finish of the match either that sucked. Hogan took, I would say, 95% or more of that match. He basically squashed Sting. He got all the offense in the match. Sting just took it and he sold. He got almost no offense. And then Hogan dropped the leg and he pinned him clean. Everything about this match was designed to bury Sting. And the fans still popped for the finish because they liked Sting and they wanted the belt off Hogan. Sting was the franchise guy in WCW. He was a made man. If it was almost anybody else in the ring that night being treated that way, that would have been the end of their career. As a credible top star, that would have been the end of them. Now I should note, even though Nick Patrick was not interviewed for this, and he really should have been, I'm hoping they just reached out to him and he just didn't want to participate. I don't know, but Nick Patrick told his side of the story on David Penzer's old podcast about 5 years ago, right? He was the referee. He would be the one to go to and say, hey, dude, what happened with this supposed fast count? This is what Nick Patrick had to say 5 years ago. What happened was 2 people, Sting and Hulk. They were the 2 franchise guys, and the 2 franchise guys were butting heads at this point in time. One guy came up to me and told me to fast count it to get some heat and give him an out. And the other guy said, don't fast count it. Keep it nice and slow. And so the person that was in charge evidently didn't want to make a call, didn't want to pick a side and made themselves scarce all night long to where I couldn't find them to ask them, hey, what do you want me to do? I'll let you guess who the star was who told Nick Patrick to count nice and slow. He doesn't want to name names. I know who the name is. The most credible person is the one who wasn't even interviewed for this show. The referee, he has no stake in who wins and who loses. I'll take his word over everybody else involved in this. The only thing he got wrong in that quote was saying that the man in charge, right, Eric Bischoff, the man in charge made himself scarce all night long. Oh, the man in charge made himself scarce all night long. I couldn't get a straight answer. He was wrong when he said that. Nick Patrick was wrong. He did speak to the man in charge. The man in charge was not Eric Bischoff. The man in charge was Hulk Hogan. And usually Hogan's nonsense, I laugh at it. We kind of poke fun at it. It's funny to listen to him spin all of his tall tales and all the bullshit that he has told over the years. But his bullshit in this episode, and this part specifically, really irritated the shit out of me. More than it usually does, because he is just so full of shit. I just can't hardly stand it. He sabotaged the finish because his ego would not allow him to take a clean loss. That is all this was ever about. And it is not as if he hadn't done jobs before. He lost the title to Lex Luger on Nitro. Got it back 5 days later, but he did the job, right? It was a great moment. Lost clean to Goldberg on Nitro at the Georgia Dome the following year. Had all the Turner executives in the Georgia Dome that night to see the show. He wanted to make a good impression, so he did the right thing for a change. But on this night, you know, you can listen to this person's version of events and you can listen to that person's version of events. He intentionally sabotaged the finish because he was selfish. And he was not thinking about anyone other than himself. Now, the episode skipped over a lot of the minutia of the NWO, especially the later stuff. Like, I don't think the casual viewer would have cared much about the NWO 2000. And the less said about that later stuff, the better. They talked about the finger poke of doom. They talked about the AOL Time Warner merger. Hogan says, you know, they may have had half a chance at surviving were it not for the merger. They had a lot more problems than just the merger. So they quickly ran through the NWO's brief, just dumb run in WWE. Before skipping to Scott Hall's death, we got an emotional Kevin Nash talking about Scott for a couple of minutes. And then Bischoff shared a nice story about a female fan that he met at a Comic-Con years ago who told him the only quality time she ever got to spend with her father when she was younger, when he wasn't drunk, was Monday nights. They would watch the NWO together on Nitro. So then years go by after Bischoff tells this story at the Comic-Con, or hears this story at the Comic-Con and meets this woman. Years go by. The same woman tracks him down somehow and emails Eric's wife. How you track down a wrestler by getting his wife's email address, I don't know. But she was persistent, I guess. Anyway, she emailed Eric's wife, Lori, and said, my father is gone. My mother is gone. I'm getting married. Would Eric walk me down the aisle? And he did. And they shared a photo of it. He had an NWO baseball cap on as he walked her down the aisle. That was very nice. That was a very nice little story at the end of the episode. But unless you're a hardcore NWO fan, I don't know that you need to spend 90 minutes of your life watching this.